Long before the smiling regulation of Milan became one of the world's most frequently cited strange laws, it existed as a very real piece of civic instruction written into the municipal code during Austro-Hungarian influence in northern Italy. It wasn't born out of whimsy, and it wasn't crafted as a joke. It came from a government that believed public demeanour affected the unity, morale and stability of a city. What makes the Milan smiling requirement so captivating in the modern day is not the absurdity of the idea, but the fact that the ordinance was never repealed. It remains dusty but present, a relic from a government that no longer exists, and a reminder of how even the smallest pieces of legislation can survive into the modern age. To understand how such an unusual rule came to be, you must place yourself in Milan during the 19th century, an era when governments took great interest in shaping not only the actions, but the attitude of their citizens. Milan was a complex city at the time, vibrant, industrious, politically restless, culturally alive and strategically important. The Austro-Hungarian administration believed that order and unity were not only enforced through laws, soldiers and bureaucrats, but also reinforced through street-level behaviours that projected civic harmony. A smiling populace, they assumed, created an atmosphere of calm. And in times of tension, calm was power. Milan, with its marketplaces, its public squares, its theatres and its ever-moving crowds, was a city that wore its mood visibly. Passers-by exchanged glances that carried political undertones. Expressions could be interpreted as signals of agreement, dissent, or unrest. A frowned brow or scowl could be seen as a protest. With that social climate in mind, the municipal government crafted an ordinance encouraging a cheerful public presence, a small reinforcement of positivity in a city where emotions often spilled into political energy. The idea wasn't unprecedented. Across Europe, many 19th century governments believed in regulating decorum. Cities issued ordinances about bowing, posture, dress, how to address officials, and how to speak in public spaces. Milan's rule about maintaining a cheerful expression fit firmly into that tradition. It was not designed as a punishment, but as a gentle directive encouraging citizens to contribute to a pleasant civic atmosphere. It also contained exceptions: funerals, hospitals, and those performing official duties, acknowledging that certain moments demanded solemnity. This wasn't a joke to them. It was a statement of civic philosophy. The smiling requirement, as written, belonged to a category of laws meant to shape behaviour rather than enforce strict punishment. It was an instruction about public spirit, intended to promote optimism, hospitality and calm interaction within a bustling European city. While the Austro-Hungarian Empire eventually dissolved and Milan transitioned into its modern Italian identity, the ordinance never received a formal repeal. It remained in the municipal code, untouched, ignored by the public, and overshadowed by the sweeping changes of the 20th century. Yet legally, it still existed, embedded in the municipal archives like an old fossil from a political climate long gone. As decades passed, Milan grew into a global centre of fashion, finance and culture. Tourists filled its historic streets to see the Duomo, Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper and the elegant shopping arcades. The smiling rule faded from memory, not consciously erased, but simply forgotten. Modern life no longer required citizens to walk with government-approved cheerfulness. No police officer would tap someone on the shoulder for wearing a gloomy expression. No court would summon a resident for failing to smile. But the ordinance remained on paper. Its rediscovery happened slowly, almost accidentally. In the latter half of the 20th century, researchers compiling lists of unusual laws stumbled across the smiling requirement buried in the municipal code. They mentioned it in legal trivia columns. Travel writers included it in quirky Things You Didn't Know About Italy segments. Then the internet amplified the discovery. The idea that a major European city once required smiling, with exceptions, was just too delightful and surprising to ignore. But beneath the amusement lies a real historical truth. Milan's smiling rule reflects the mindset of a government that believed civic harmony depended on public expression. It reveals the invisible ways that cities have tried to manage mood, expression, and social atmosphere. It shows a time when lawmakers thought that shaping how people looked at one another in the street could help prevent conflict. It is not merely a funny trivia item. It is a tiny window into a past political era. To truly appreciate the rule, you must imagine Milanese life in the years when it was enacted. Picture the tight, winding streets filled with vendors calling out their goods. Imagine citizens moving through the city's public squares under the watch of soldiers stationed at checkpoints. Envision a place where silence, posture and expression were loaded with social significance. Even a simple frown might be interpreted as criticism of the authorities. A forced smile, encouraged by law, offered a neutral facade that protected both the citizen and the government. This is the historical context that allowed such a rule to exist without public outrage. It wasn't seen as an invasion of personal emotion. People of the time were accustomed to governments that oversaw matters of conduct. The smiling requirement was just one more directive among many, not nearly as unusual or intrusive to them as it seems to us today. The rare beauty of this law's survival lies in what it represents. It is a time capsule of political sociology, preserved in the city code because no administration ever took the time to remove it. Later, governments had more pressing issues: reconstruction after war, economic development, social reform, modernization. Removing an old ordinance encouraging public cheerfulness was never a priority. It caused no harm, it posed no threat, and so it simply remained. The idea that a centuries-old law lingered quietly in Milan's legal code captures the modern imagination. It serves as a reminder that laws do not always vanish when the societies that wrote them disappear. They often remain embedded in the structure of a city's legislation, forgotten but technically alive. And because of this survival, Milan became known accurately, though incompletely, for having a law encouraging constant smiling. The reason the ordinance is still referenced today is because it reveals something universal about legal systems. They accumulate layers. Each generation adds, but not every generation subtracts. Some laws remain because they are meaningful. Others remain because they were simply never removed. And some, like Milan's smiling rule, remain because they quietly slipped through history without ever being questioned. When researchers rediscovered the ordinance, their reactions varied. Some treated it as a charming curiosity. Others analysed it more seriously, exploring the social expectations of the time. But once the law entered the public consciousness, it took on a life of its own. It became a global talking point. It became the subject of travel articles, trivia books, classroom discussions, and legal blogs. People who had never been to Italy suddenly knew something quirky about Milan. Tourists began sharing the story with each other while strolling through the city. Some even made a point of smiling more than usual, not out of fear of violating the law, but because the story made them laugh. Eventually, the narrative grew into a cultural phenomenon. The city where smiling was not just polite, it was required. Yet behind that phenomenon is a real ordinance. Not a myth, not an urban legend invented by travel agencies. A genuine civic rule written into the municipal code during Austro-Hungarian governance and never repealed. And that, more than anything, is what gives this story its weight. It is not fictional whimsy. It is a legal artifact from a bygone administration that continues to exist on paper. Even today, legal scholars occasionally re-find the ordinance, shake their heads, and acknowledge it as one of many relics still hiding in old European codes. They point to it as an example of how laws can tell stories. Stories of governments long dissolved, cultures long changed, and philosophies long outdated. The smiling regulation of Milan remains one of the best preserved illustrations of how political ideology can shape social expectations. Its survival demonstrates how old laws, even those meant to guide behaviour rather than punish it, can linger in the background of city identity. And its rediscovery shows how the modern world finds fascination in the small peculiarities of the past. If you try to imagine Milan in the decades after the Smiling Ordinance was written, it becomes clear why the rule managed to slip through time like an uninvited guest who quietly blends into the wallpaper. Cities tend to forget the small things first, and nothing is smaller, legally speaking, than a recommendation to please look cheerful unless you have a good reason not to. And yet here we are, modern Milanese citizens striding confidently across Piazza del Duomo, unaware that they are technically upholding a piece of law written when top hats were considered edgy fashion, and the concept of modern dentistry was still slowly negotiating its terms. It is impossible not to appreciate the irony. A city now internationally famous for fashion runways, luxury labels, sleek minimalism, and runway models whose smiles are often contractually optional, is also on paper the city where smiling was once legally expected. If that contradiction feels poetic, that is because it is. Milan thrives on contradictions. It always has. And the smiling ordinance is simply one of its oldest and most overlooked ones. By the early 20th century, Milan was transitioning through political earthquakes. Empires fell, republics rose, wars erupted, borders shifted, and administrative shelves stacked up with more paperwork than any mortal clerk could ever realistically review. Somewhere in those shelves, in a dusty ledger that no one opened anymore, the smiling rule continued to exist like a polite ghost, one that didn't rattle chains, didn't knock over tables, but simply hovered there, waiting to be rediscovered. If any Milanese citizen had bothered to look into the municipal code around that time, which almost no one did, they might have noticed that the ordinance was still sitting there alongside rules about marketplace conduct, street sweeping schedules, and regulations concerning how loudly one could advertise vegetables in a public square. These were the kinds of laws that made perfect sense in the 1800s, but now felt like they belonged in a museum exhibit titled Life Before Smartphones. And yet, as the city modernized, the law remained. People rushed to work, sipped espresso at bars, and navigated trolley cars without once considering that they were legally expected to appear cheerful. In a sense, the people of Milan didn't need a written law to encourage smiling. They had culture, humour, and the ever-present Italian habit of expressing emotions loudly enough that even the pigeons in the piazza learned to interpret human moods. Still, the ordinance existed, quietly, persistently. And as the city barreled through the 20th century, the smiling requirement lived on as an unintentional act of bureaucratic endurance. Milan had other things to prioritize: rebuilding after wars, economic development, hosting the world's most influential fashion weeks, becoming a financial powerhouse, innovating in design, and inventing at least 17 different ways to make the same espresso feel like a life-altering event. So yes, the smiling rule survived mainly through neglect, but not the malicious kind. It survived through the benign indifference that allows outdated things to remain in place simply because removing them would require a meeting, and no one wants to schedule a meeting about smiling. There is no political glory in revoking a law that tells people to look pleasant in public. It doesn't win votes. It doesn't rally crowds. And if someone did try to repeal it, imagine the headline, "Local government announces citizens no longer required to smile." That's not exactly a morale booster. By the late 20th century, Milan had forgotten the ordinance entirely, but the ordinance had not forgotten Milan. It remained buried, never repealed, never enforced, and never referenced. It was the legal equivalent of a polite aunt who sits quietly in the corner at family gatherings, forgotten until someone finally asks, "Wait, how long has she been here?" When researchers in the 1970s and 1980s began compiling encyclopedic lists of strange and outdated laws around the world, they stumbled upon the smiling mandate. They expected it to be a joke, an error, or an exaggeration. Then they dug deeper and discovered that it wasn't fabricated. It was truly written in Milan's municipal code during Austro-Hungarian administrative influence. That revelation created a small earthquake in the world of legal trivia. This law wasn't mythical. It wasn't misinterpreted. It wasn't someone on the internet made it up. It was real. Of course, the modern world reacted exactly how one might expect, with fascination, mild disbelief, and immediate plans to tell everyone about it. The smiling rule became a global celebrity among strange laws. Travel magazines highlighted it between articles about gondolas and Tuscan wine. Trivia books wedged it beside stories about ancient taxes on salt and rules about how many pigs someone could lead through a market at one time. Radio hosts laughed about it during morning segments, and television presenters brought it up as a fun fact when interviewing Italian guests who were confused but amused. The story grew legs, then it grew wings. Then it became that one fact that people excitedly whispered to each other on the flight to Italy. By the way, did you know you legally have to smile in Milan? It didn't matter that enforcement was non-existent. The mere existence of the rule was enough to make people smile, which ironically makes the law more effective today than it ever was when it was created. It was during this period of rediscovery that a strange phenomenon occurred. Tourists started testing the smiling requirement for fun, not by refusing to smile, but by over-smiling. Streets, once filled with casual, natural expressions, suddenly featured groups of visitors beaming like they were posing for toothpaste commercials. They weren't doing it out of fear of punishment. They were doing it because the idea amused them. They wanted to say they had experienced the law, even though the experience consisted entirely of smiling voluntarily. Meanwhile, Milanese locals watched this develop with a mixture of amusement and polite confusion. To them, smiling was personal, cultural, or expressive, but never a matter of municipal obligation. They weren't aware that tourists believed there was a legal expectation. But luckily, the Milanese are famously unbothered by tourists behaving strangely. They had, after all, survived countless seasons of fashion weeks, design expos, and people trying to take photos with Aperol spritzes in increasingly dangerous physical positions. Eventually, the media amplified the story again. Writers explained that the ordinance was tied to Austro-Hungarian-era civic expectations. Academics commented on how old laws often survive simply because no one thinks to remove them. Sociologists pointed out that Milan's smiling rule was a precursor to modern discussions about public decorum and emotional norms. Through this renewed attention, the smiling ordinance became something of a cultural artifact, a symbol not of Milan's present, but of its layered past. It belonged to a time when governments attempted to shape public behaviour through courtesy laws, moral guidelines, and polite expectations. And while the rule no longer had any bearing on modern conduct, it remained an accidental ambassador of the city's legal history. In a way, the law's survival is poetic. Milan is a city built on history layered over history, with modern skyscrapers rising beside medieval cathedrals and Roman foundations hiding under cobblestone alleys. The smiling ordinance is one more layer, less visible, less enduring, but just as significant in its own small way. It is an echo of a society once deeply concerned with public unity, social appearance, and collective calm. What makes the ordinance even more fascinating today is how it symbolises the unintended longevity of laws. Some statutes persist for centuries, not because they matter, but because no one bothers to delete them. And when such laws are rediscovered, they reveal the quirks, anxieties, and aspirations of the societies that created them. The smiling requirement of Milan reveals that the city once valued cheerfulness so highly that it wrote it into law, however lightly. It also reveals a charming contradiction. Modern Milan is sleek, stylish, forward-thinking, and known for its glamorous seriousness. Yet beneath that image lies an old ordinance encouraging everyone to keep their spirits lifted publicly. That juxtaposition is not only amusing, it is deeply human. It shows that laws are not always rational machines built for efficiency. Sometimes they are emotional artifacts, remnants of civic philosophies that were once considered essential. Even today, when people learn about the smiling ordinance, their first reaction is usually laughter, followed by disbelief, followed by curiosity. And that curiosity is powerful. It leads them to ask why such a law came into existence, what it meant culturally, and why it remained for so long. And through that curiosity, they learn about Milan's layered past. There is also something undeniably uplifting about the idea that a city once encouraged happiness as a civic duty. In a world filled with difficult laws, punitive laws, and bureaucratic labyrinths, the smiling rule stands out simply because it wanted people to feel good, or at least look like they might be feeling good. It is not a law of punishment. It is a law of encouragement. And while modern Milan does not enforce it, the law's survival still quietly influences the way people talk about the city. It gives Milan a touch of whimsy. It makes the city feel more approachable, more human, more storied. And in turn, it makes everyone who learns about it smile, which might be the most ironic twist of all. The strange revival of a very old rule. There are few things in life more amusing than watching an old regulation stumble into the modern world like a confused grandparent trying to understand TikTok trends. That's essentially what happened when the Milanese smiling ordinance, a relic of the Austro-Hungarian period, resurfaced in contemporary conversation. A law that once carried a clear civic purpose, crafted in a world of rigid politeness and mandatory good manners, suddenly found itself trending on social media alongside cat memes and videos of flying pizzas. And Milan, a city known for its effortless, cool, stylish aloofness and world-class, resting neutral face, collectively raised an eyebrow. Yet even that eyebrow technically should have tilted toward a cheerful curve. The reawakening of this old regulation started when journalists and travel bloggers rediscovered the peculiar rule, the expectation set out in old municipal code that residents of Milan should maintain a cheerful disposition in public. Exceptions sensibly included funerals, hospital visits, and people performing certain official duties. Everyone else? Smile, citizen. The empire expects happiness. The city's initial reaction was a mixture of amusement, disbelief, and a sudden mass interest in legal archaeology. Milanese lawyers, who usually spend their days handling contracts, business filings, and zoning matters, began receiving emails from people asking, "Am I legally required to smile while ordering a cappuccino?" One lawyer dryly responded, "Only if the espresso is good," demonstrating that Milan's sense of humour survived the fall of empires quite nicely. As newspapers revisited the story, Milan reacted with the modern-day equivalent of a collective shrug. But the conversation didn't end there. It blossomed into a city-wide game of irony, cultural introspection, and comedic reinterpretation of a law that technically exists but functionally does nothing. And in that strange mixture of history and humanity, Milan found something oddly charming. A city known for serious faces grapples with mandatory joy. To an outsider, it might seem like mandatory smiling would fit naturally into Italy's reputation for warmth and friendliness. But Milan is not Florence. Milan is not Naples. Milan is not a small seaside village where everyone knows their neighbour and waves at the fisherman as he pulls his boat in. Milan is Italy's financial engine, its fashion capital, its design laboratory, a place where people walk fast, talk fast, and don't usually have time to smile at every street corner unless they're modelling sunglasses. So when international media declared that Milan, of all cities, had an unrepealed law requiring constant smiling, the Milanese public responded the only way they could, with peak, calibrated, designer-level sarcasm. Social media posts emerged. Mandatory smiling in Milan? Did they confuse us with Disneyland? We'll need to add a line on the Fashion Week invitations. Dress code, haute couture, facial code, happiness. Can we smile ironically, asking for a friend? Very quickly the conversation shifted from skepticism to humour, and from humour to civic pride. After all, if Milan was going to be saddled with a bizarre historical rule, it might as well embrace it with style. One resident commented to a journalist, "If the law requires me to smile, I will. But it will be the most judgmental smile you've ever seen." Milanese facial expressions tend to convey layers. I see you, I understand you, and I'm late for something important, all bundled into one sophisticated look. A law mandating smiling wasn't going to change that, but the comedic potential? Enormous. Modern Milan meets its Austro-Hungarian past. The rediscovery of the smiling ordinance has also sparked a peculiar kind of time travel within Milanese cultural identity. While most modern residents know their city's Roman roots and Renaissance legacy, fewer actively think about the period in which northern Italy fell under Austrian influence. Yet here was a regulation from that era, one of the few to survive the bureaucratic extinction of an empire, still lingering quietly in the municipal code, like an old librarian no one noticed in the corner. Historians and legal scholars stepped in to explain that such civic behaviour regulations were common in that era. Many European territories under Habsburg administration had rules promoting public decorum, politeness and order. Some involved dress codes, others involved restrictions on public shouting. Milan, apparently, got mandatory smiling. The academic reaction was calm and methodical. The public reaction was, "Wait, we've been legally supposed to smile this whole time?" One university professor humorously added, "Milanese people not smiling." If that were illegal, half the city would be in prison every Monday morning. Still, this unusual encounter with its own past has become a point of fascination. Teachers now include the smiling ordinance in lesson plans about local history. Travel guides mention it as a fun fact, and Milanese parents have, in a few documented cases, jokingly used it to persuade teenagers to participate in family outings. "Come on, we're going to the piazza. And remember, the law says you must smile." Teenagers still rolled their eyes, but a few smiled out of sheer disbelief. The law in modern daily life. What's even more interesting is how Milan acknowledges the law without ever actually enforcing it. There are no smiling police patrolling the streets with clipboards, ready to issue citations for insufficient cheerfulness. No officers lurking near coffee shops, ensuring that the morning rush hour crowd maintains a legally acceptable level of joy. If anything, the modern application of the law exists solely in cultural conversation. It's a running joke, a historical oddity, a civic meme. You can buy T-shirts in souvenir shops that say, "Milan, smile, it's the law." Cafe owners have placed signs near their counters reading, "Don't forget to smile, per municipal regulation." Tour guides mention it between explanations of canals, churches and fashion districts. Milan has turned its strange inheritance into a charming badge of identity. And yet the deeper irony is that despite the city's reputation for seriousness, Milan is actually a warm place beneath the surface. It just expresses its warmth in subtle, understated ways. A friendly nod, a soft laugh over espresso, a patient gesture in crowded traffic, a moment of politeness during a bustling commute. The smiling law hasn't changed any of that. It simply adds a humorous backdrop to behaviours that already existed. The international misinterpretation circus. Perhaps the funniest part of all is how the rest of the world reacts to the smiling ordinance. Foreign publications often take the sensational route. Breaking! Italians forced to smile by law. Travelling to Milan? Bring your happy face. Some articles suggest incorrectly that tourists can get fined. Others imply that the smiling requirement is rooted in modern politics. A few even claim that Milanese police enforce it during festivals, which is demonstrably false. And Milan's response? A collective, stylish eye roll. International humour aside, the city appreciates that this odd law adds to its mystique. Tourists love learning about it. Travel vloggers adore making jokes about it. Comedians treat it like a gift wrapped in bureaucracy. And Milan, with its characteristic poise, allows the misinterpretations to swirl while offering just enough factual correction to keep the story grounded. One city official reportedly chuckled during an interview and said, "If smiling becomes mandatory again, we'll let you know. For now, we trust people to manage their own faces." Why the law still matters. Emotionally, not legally. Here's the twist. Even though the regulation has no enforceable power today, it still holds symbolic value. It reflects a historical moment when governments believed they could legislate mood. It shows how civility once had legal scaffolding. And it reveals something unexpectedly sweet about human nature. Even when the law demanded happiness, people found their own authentic ways to express it. Whether Milanese residents choose to smile or not, the law sparks conversations about what makes a city warm, what makes people treat each other with kindness. Can a cheerful environment be created through expectation? Or must it arise naturally? Most Milanese lean toward the latter. They know that genuine warmth can't be forced. But the existence of the law has become a reminder. Ironic, humorous, occasionally touching, that a little kindness goes a long way, whether mandated or not. The everyday smile, authentic or obligatory. Psychologists who weighed in on the resurfacing of the law had their own interpretations. Some argued that the idea of promoting cheerfulness wasn't inherently bad. After all, smiling has proven psychological benefits, both for the person smiling and for the people around them. Others emphasized the dangers of forced positivity, noting that humans should be allowed to experience a full range of emotions without feeling pressured. But Milan's smiling ordinance doesn't force anything today. It acts more like a ghost of courtesy past, a reminder that once society tried to shape behavior with surprisingly gentle measures. It's not oppressive, it's not punitive, it's almost poetic, like a faded note from history whispering, "Be kind where you can." And in a world where stress, rushing and digital overload dominate daily life, some Milanese find that message refreshing. From historical curiosity to civic comedy. Perhaps the best part of the Smiling Ordinance's modern revival is how it fosters community humour. Jokes bring people together, and Milan has embraced this old law as a playful cultural thread that ties together past and present. Some community groups organise smiling strolls purely for fun. Other events encourage ironic participation, like Smile Like It's 1850 Day, where locals wear period attire and practice historical cheerfulness. Cafes occasionally promote smile discounts, 10% off if you manage to show genuine joy before your morning espresso, a challenge for many. These events aren't mocking the law. They're celebrating its absurdity, its softness, its historical personality. They're acknowledging that Milan, a city often portrayed as serious, has a playful heart beneath its chic exterior. Why Milan is the perfect home for this law today. There's something delightful about the fact that Milan, a global hub of fashion, luxury, finance and design, carries this peculiar historical treasure. Other cities have absurd laws, but few respond with such well-balanced humour and elegance. The Smiling Ordinance complements the city's character in unexpected ways. It contrasts Milan's reputation for seriousness. It highlights the city's sense of humour. It allows residents to laugh at themselves. It turns legal trivia into cultural charm. Most importantly, it reinforces a simple truth. Milan is a city that doesn't mind having a little fun, even with its past. Whether residents choose to smile or not, the law gives them something to talk about, laugh about, and occasionally imitate for comedic effect. It's harmless, it's quirky. It's one more layer in a city filled with layers. And in the end, the law survives, not because it's useful, but because Milan enjoys the story. The cultural echo of a forgotten rule. When a long-forgotten municipal ordinance resurfaces in modern times, it usually sparks mild curiosity, maybe a brief article, and then quietly fades back into legal obscurity. But Milan's smiling regulation, born in an era of empire, etiquette and mandated public cheer, refuses to go quietly. It has become an echo that refuses to fade, a quirky historical beacon shining through layers of modernization, urban development, digital transformation, and global attention. And Milan, instead of muting that echo, has turned it into a kind of cultural soundtrack. It's strange how a regulation once intended to impose harmony has inadvertently created joy in the most modern, self-aware way. Through humour, irony, and a sense of collective participation in one of Europe's most peculiar surviving ordinances. If anything, the law has become less about smiling and more about acknowledging the city's unique relationship with its own history. The Milanese do not take themselves too seriously, and this law proves it. Because despite their reputation for efficiency, sophistication and seriousness, beneath the polished exterior lies a vibrant, clever, occasionally cheeky personality. And nothing reveals that better than the way the city engages with this strange legacy. Milan's public spaces and the art of selective cheerfulness. Walk through Milan's public spaces on any given day, and you'll see a fascinating tapestry of expressions. At the Piazza Duomo, tourists beam with delight, cameras raised, pigeons swirling in photogenic chaos. Meanwhile, Milanese locals stride past with the precise level of emotional restraint appropriate for someone late to a meeting but unwilling to run because it might crease their tailored jacket. It is, in many ways, the perfect embodiment of the city. Visitors bring the smiles, locals bring the pace. If one were to take the old smiling regulation literally, Piazza Duomo would be the ideal enforcement zone. But of course, nobody enforces anything. Instead, it serves as a kind of living case study in how people interpret cultural expectations differently. A cheerful tourist maybe assumes the city is naturally happy. A resident may assume the tourist simply hasn't had to deal with Milanese traffic yet. Galleria Vittorio Emanuele's second, one of the most iconic shopping arcades in the world, offers another microcosm of Milanese expression. If someone were to observe the crowd in slow motion, they might notice a pattern. The smiles appear during shopping, disappear during bill paying, then reappear during coffee consumption. A truly scientific cycle. And through all of this, the hovering ghost of the unrepealed law seems to whisper, "Smile if you'd like to, or don't. It's historically suggested, not legally required." The fashion industry's unintentional compliance. It's impossible to ignore the irony that the fashion industry, one of Milan's defining pillars, has become an accidental enforcer of the smiling ordinance without ever intending to. Fashion photography for decades leaned heavily toward serious expressions. Models perfected the art of looking deeply passionate about absolutely nothing. Yet in recent years, Milan has seen a shift. Designers, photographers and brands have begun embracing joyful campaigns, bright colours, playful poses, genuine laughter, and not the posed, choreographed kind, but spontaneous, contagious, soul-refreshing laughter. Somewhere in an imaginary alternate universe, a very dusty Austro-Hungarian bureaucrat would be thrilled. But the real-world explanation is far more modern. Fashion, like culture, evolves, and Milan's design community recognizes something powerful. A smile is a universal connector. It transcends language and background. It makes bold style choices look approachable. It humanizes luxury. Without meaning to, Milan's fashion scene may have become the biggest promoter of cheerfulness in the city. And the smiling ordinance? It sits nearby like a proud ancestor, watching future generations thrive. When local businesses embrace the joke, one of the most charming reactions to the rediscovery of the smiling law has come from small local businesses, especially cafes, bakeries, and small boutiques tucked into narrow Milanese streets. Many of them have turned this obscure regulation into branding gold. Walk past a cafe near Brera, and you might see a chalkboard sign reading, "Smile," not because we have to, but because coffee exists. Another bakery near Porta Venezia uses a sign that says, "Happiness required, smiles optional, pastries mandatory." Still another store displays a sticker on its window, "Smiling encouraged since the 1800s. These businesses aren't mocking the law. They're celebrating it. They're using it to build a warm, inviting atmosphere that says there's history here, and humour, and good coffee. In a world that often rushes forward at alarming speed, these little nods to the past offer a comforting sense of continuity. A reminder that even the oddest chapter of history can enrich the present if given the chance. Tourism, curiosity, and the magic of legal oddities. Tourists adore quirky laws. They're like exotic souvenirs from the world of governance. Intangible, amusing, and endlessly shareable. So when Milan's smiling ordinance began popping up in blogs, travel articles and guidebooks, visitors started seeking out the story as eagerly as they sought out gelato. Walking tours now include it as a humorous stop, with guides telling the tale of the old regulation and encouraging the group to give their best exaggerated smiles, often resulting in pictures that look like the cast of an absurdist play. Museum gift shops sell magnets and postcards referencing the law. Tour buses use it as an icebreaker. Travel vloggers dedicate entire segments to trying not to smile in Milan, a challenge they always lose because of how absurd the premise is. And Milan? The city watches this from its elegant balconies and says, well, if they're smiling, that's fine with us. The legal community's amused restraint. No group has reacted to this law with more polite exasperation than Milan's legal professionals. Lawyers and bureaucrats face a peculiar dilemma. On one hand, the ordinance is technically real, not repealed, still present in the municipal documents. On the other hand, it is utterly irrelevant in practical terms. So legal scholars do what they do best. They explain the nuance with professional calm while suppressing the urge to laugh. A municipal official once told a reporter, "It is not enforceable. It is not applied. It is, in practical terms, a historical artifact." But then added, perhaps unintentionally, "Still, it is nice to have laws that encourage kindness." Another attorney described the rule as a cultural curiosity that has survived due to administrative inertia, which is legal terminology for nobody bothered to delete it and it's charming, so why not keep it? And in a world where legal codes often brim with harsh prohibitions and intimidating penalties, Milan's embarrassing little happiness rule stands out as something remarkably gentle. If you had to choose a law to accidentally keep for 150 years, this one ranks pretty high. The sociological interpretation, mandatory joy as cultural mirror. Sociologists have begun using the ordinance as a case study, not for behavioral compliance, but for how communities reinterpret outdated laws to fit modern culture. The smiling regulation in this sense reveals far more about current Milan than it ever did about the Milan of the 1800s. Today, the law serves as a symbol of playful civic identity. Milan is comfortable enough with itself to laugh at its own past, a reflection of changing societal norms. What was once enforced is now voluntary and still valued. A reminder of humanity beneath bureaucracy. Even old laws can carry warmth, a conversation starter across cultures. Everyone enjoys learning about it. Sociologists argue that laws like this represent a kind of soft cultural memory, a reminder that communities evolve, values shift, and what was once mandatory becomes humorous but still meaningful. And in a city as dynamic as Milan, that memory matters. Milan's unique blend of elegance and irony. It's no accident that Milan handles the smiling ordinance the way it does. The city's identity has always been a blend of style and subtle humour, sophistication infused with self-awareness. Milanese culture is built on contrasts, historical structures next to futuristic skyscrapers, serious business districts beside lively nightlife, formal etiquette layered over relaxed social warmth. The smiling law fits into this contrast perfectly. It is both serious and absurd, historical and modern, sincere and ironic. Some cities might be embarrassed by such an ordinance. Milan embraces it like an eccentric relative who tells unbelievable stories at family gatherings, but is cherished all the same. The city knows how to wear its quirks gracefully. The psychological impact on the urban mood. Interestingly, psychologists have noted that the smiling law's renewed presence in public dialogue has had a subtle but noticeable effect on Milan's urban atmosphere. Not because people fear punishment, there is none, but because humour creates connection. When strangers bond over shared amusement, something lovely happens. The city feels a little smaller, a little kinder, a little lighter. People don't walk around forcing smiles, but they do smile when they hear someone joke about the law. They smile when a tour guide mentions it. They smile when they see the T-shirts. They smile when they tell friends about it. In the end, the law causes more smiles as a joke than it ever could as a mandate, which is, in its own way, poetic. Why a silly old rule still holds value. As much as Milan treats the smiling ordinance with humour, there is a deeper meaning beneath the irony. The law persists because it represents something fundamentally human, a desire for a harmonious community. Even though it no longer holds legal weight, the message it carries is timeless. Be kind, be gentle, make space for joy. A smile can change someone's day. Milan has found a way to preserve this message without enforcing it. And that balance between history and modernity, between obligation and authenticity, is what makes the city so uniquely charming. The curious case of a law that refuses extinction. Every city has a history, but Milan has something far stranger. A history that occasionally wakes up and taps the modern world on the shoulder, as if to say, "Remember me?" And nowhere is that more evident than in the persistence of the smiling ordinance, a civic rule crafted during the Austro-Hungarian administrative period that has somehow, against all odds, survived the fall of empires, wars, political upheavals, modern constitutional reforms, and countless bureaucratic revisions. In a world where laws evolve, vanish and reappear with dizzying regularity, this one remains like the last leaf clinging to a winter tree, improbable, stubborn and oddly beautiful. While Milan today is a bustling metropolis powered by finance, fashion, technology and world-class design, the smiling ordinance lingers in the structure of its municipal past. Technically unrepealed, functionally irrelevant, but unmistakably alive in the cultural consciousness. In an age of rapid change, a tiny, outdated mandate to smile stands as one of the strangest reminders of continuity. The question now is not whether the law matters in a practical sense, it doesn't, but whether it matters in a symbolic one. And as Milan steps forward into its next chapters, the answer increasingly seems to be yes. Milan's relationship with its own quirks. Cities often take pride in their grand monuments, their historic events, their artistic triumphs. Milan is proud of those too. The Duomo, La Scala, Leonardo da Vinci's legacy, the Navigli canals, the skyscrapers of Porta Nuova. But the smiling law represents something far humbler and far more human. The idea that even in a city of ambition and elegance, people have always valued small gestures of friendliness. The rediscovered rule has become part of Milan's identity, not because of what it mandates, but because of the way it reveals the city's sense of humour about itself. When locals talk about the ordinance today, it's often with a mixture of disbelief and affection. They might say, of all the laws to survive the 1800s, it had to be the smiling one. Or, if you're going to ignore a law, let it be this one. And yet there's a curious pride behind the jokes. Milan has plenty of serious legal history. But this is the law that became a citywide inside joke, one that Milan is happy to keep alive. How modern Milan negotiates the past. Modern Milan is a city in motion. Sleek trams gliding past Gothic spires, innovative cafes tucked beside centuries-old courtyards, cutting-edge fashion houses operating in Renaissance buildings. In such a city, the coexistence of ancient and modern is not a contradiction. It's the signature style. The smiling ordinance fits perfectly into this blend. Its survival isn't the result of negligence. It's the result of an incredibly complex legal evolution. Over generations, Milan, like other Italian cities, updated and revised countless administrative codes. Old sections were reorganized, replaced, or absorbed into broader reforms. Yet some relics remained. Not because they were overlooked, but because they didn't conflict with anything new. In short, the smiling regulation simply never caused enough trouble to require deletion. If anything, its presence became a quiet testament to a different era, a time when civic order was intertwined with enforced politeness, when empires imagined that harmony could be legislated. And Milan, being Milan, looked at this unusual inheritance and said, "Strange but charming. Let it stay." The law in daily conversation. The rule doesn't exist to be obeyed. It exists to be referenced. A Milanese barista might joke with a grumpy morning customer, "Careful, signore, you're breaking the happiness law." A teacher might mention it in class. You think homework is unfair? Imagine living in a time where smiling was required. A parent might use it to lighten a stressful day. The law says we have to smile, so let's at least pretend. The ordinance has become a cultural cue, a way to encourage levity, to break the tension of a busy city, to remind people that life is more enjoyable when approached with humour. The true power of the law isn't legal, it's social. Tourists and the delightful misunderstanding. The international fascination with the smiling ordinance has only grown. Travel writers adore it. Bloggers savour it. Video creators treat it like a treasure. Tour guides dramatise it for comedic effect. And tourists? They take it at face value, quite literally. Many arrive in the city believing they are required to smile. And so they do. They stroll through the piazzas with cheerful expressions, genuinely believing they are participating in a centuries-old cultural practice. Locals notice this and respond with the gentle amusement that Milan has mastered so well. One Milanese woman was overheard telling a confused tourist, "If you want to smile, smile. If you don't, nobody will arrest you. But you'll get better espresso service if you look friendly." Whether she was joking remains a mystery. The law as an academic curiosity. Legal scholars see the smiling ordinance as a case study in procedural survival. how some municipal rules linger because they simply never became incompatible with new authority structures. Historians view it as a window into a time when governments saw etiquette as part of civic duty. Sociologists see it as a mirror that reflects the cultural evolution of urban friendliness. Psychologists see it as evidence that enforced positivity never took root, but that suggested positivity can still shape a city's personality. And Milan sees it as a story worth telling. Why Milan chooses not to repeal the law. If Milan wanted the smiling ordinance gone, it would be gone. Municipal councils can revise historical codes with the stroke of a pen. But the ordinance remains for several subtle reasons. First, it's harmless. It imposes no penalties, no obligations, no burdens. It floats quietly in the background like a friendly ghost. Second, it's delightful. Every city needs a quirk, something that makes it feel alive and unique. Third, it's unexpectedly meaningful. In a world filled with stress, division and constant digital noise, a law that encourages smiling feels like a breath of antique optimism. Fourth, it enhances Milan's global image, not in a cheap commercial way, but in a warm, personal way. It shows that the city doesn't mind having a sense of humour about itself. Fifth, its history. Removing it would erase a small but distinctive piece of Milan's past. So the law stays, not because it matters legally, but because it matters symbolically. What the law means in today's social climate. There is an emerging conversation, especially among younger generations, about the value of emotional authenticity. People want to feel what they feel, not what they're told to feel. And yet the smiling ordinance doesn't contradict that. Instead of mandating emotional performance, it invites reflection. Why do we smile? When do we smile? What do smiles mean in different cultures? Can a city encourage positivity without demanding it? Milan doesn't expect constant happiness. The city knows that real life contains exhaustion, frustration and complexity. But the idea of a historical nudge toward friendliness resonates with many who find it oddly comforting. It's a reminder from the past that kindness, even when imperfectly implemented, has always been valued. Could the law ever matter again, realistically? No. Milan will never enforce a smiling requirement. But symbolically, it matters more now than ever. Cities around the world struggle with isolation, urban anonymity, social disconnection. Milan's smiling law, relic or not, offers a tiny blueprint for how cities can encourage warmth without forcing it. It shows that a mandate from the past can become a cultural ritual rather than a legal obligation. And if laughter truly is the best medicine, then Milan has a prescription that predates modern psychology by more than a century. The future of a law that won't disappear. As Milan continues to evolve, technologically, architecturally, culturally, the smiling ordinance will continue to serve as a quirky anchor to the past. It will show up in textbooks, documentaries, travel guides, and humorous conversations for years to come. Some speculate that the city might one day officially reclassify it as heritage legislation rather than active ordinance. Others believe it should remain exactly as it is, half forgotten, half celebrated, always amusing. One thing is certain, Milan doesn't want it gone. The law has become part of the city's identity, woven into the fabric of its humour, its public culture, and its affectionate self-awareness. To remove it would be like removing a wink from a long-standing joke. The final smile. And now we arrive at the heart of the matter. Milan's smiling ordinance, technically unrepealed, historically rooted, culturally adopted, has transformed from a bureaucratic footnote into a beloved symbol of what makes the city extraordinary. It represents a bridge between eras, a reminder that laws can carry kindness, a playful spirit in an elegant metropolis, a story that brings people together, a joyful contradiction woven into the city's style. And most importantly, it reveals that even a serious, ambitious, world-shaping city like Milan knows how to embrace its absurdities with grace. In the end, the true legacy of the ordinance is not the requirement to smile. It is the invitation. An invitation to look at the world with warmth. An invitation to lighten the day for others. An invitation to connect even briefly. An invitation to remember that joy is a shared language. And while Milan may never enforce the law again, it doesn't have to, because the city already understands one simple truth. Sometimes the most powerful laws are the ones that make us smile simply by existing.